Welcome to the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. My name is Ed Holinsky. We've got another great guest here today. It's outside the North Tonawanda Bishop Gibbons family, but this gentleman has a lot of knowledge of the North Tonawanda program. He played against the Lumberjacks. He certainly coached against the Lumberjacks for more than 3 decades. Please join me in welcoming the one and the only Jerry Tutwiler of Kenmore West. Jerry, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Ed. Thank you.
I got to go through your resume. I mean, it's a pretty darn impressive resume. You played for Kenmore West 1961 to 1963, and we'll talk about that era. But then after college at Alabama, you came back. You were an assistant to Kenmore West 1968 to 1979 under the great Jules Yakopovich. And then you became the Kenmore West head coach 1980 to 2000. You spent 32 years just on the coaching side in the Kenmore West program. I mean, that's impressive in and of itself. But I want to start by walk us through your playing days from 1961 and 1963.
Okay, it was kind of uncommon back in the 60s for sophomores to be on the varsity team. And Jules Yakopovich, by the way, who I never called Jules to the day he passed away, I always called him Coach Yakopovich, just out of respect. But I played in 61 as a sophomore on the Kenmore West team, and then played my junior and senior year, graduated in 64. And in that time, we played NT when I was a sophomore. John Chisera was the running back at that point. And we won a game at West my sophomore year, 14-13. And then I don't know what happened my junior year as far as that game. But my senior year, we played at NT, the last game of my high school career. And we won that game, I believe, 28-0. I got to show my grandkids a tape from your guys, of me playing in that 63 game, and I scored the first and last touchdown of the game. So they thought that was the neatest thing going.
How was the rivalry back then? Or better yet, let's back up a little bit. How was the play back then, in your estimation, of the Niagara Frontier League?
The Niagara Frontier League was a great league, and we were very sad to see it break up in 72 when we went to federation play based on school enrollments. And those rivalries from NT, Tonawanda, and Niagara Falls were the 3 main teams besides East and West at that point. It was a great rivalry. I don't know if, you remember back in those days, like the TNT game and the Kenmore West, Kenmore East game, we used to get 8,000 to 12,000 people at that game. But the schools were so large. I mean, we had in the early 70s, we had 3,000 students at Kenmore West. And I was really sad to see the NFL break up, because what happened was we started playing teams like West Seneca West, West Seneca East, Hamburg, Frontier, Orchard Park. And we kind of lost sight of the rivalries that we had back in the 60s.
Did it make any difference that you would play smaller schools like Tonawanda or Trot or LaSalle?
Well, it went in cycles. Tonawanda always had a really good football team under Clint Small. NT always had a really good team, and Kenmore West did. Kenmore East came into the picture with Jack Oakers as the coach years ago, and then Dick Adams took over and had the program for a number of years. But the rivalry was awesome. In fact, us guys from Kenmore, we didn't like going across the canal over to NT. It was like a different world to us. But it was a great rivalry, playing on the field at night under the lights over there, because they were one of the few schools that had lights. It was pretty cool.
What do you recall playing against Rick Casada and Tonawanda during that era?
Well, I hurt my back the start of that season, and we played over at Tonawanda, and I only got to play a few plays because I had a sciatic nerve problem in my back. And Casada, all those guys that played at that time, Larry Bodie, the Cheesleys. Give you a quick one with the Tonawanda Kenmore West. My senior year, we were both 7-0 going into Tonawanda, and went to play that game. And my name was called because one of our defensive backs got hurt. And Coach Yakopovich said, whatever you do, don't get pass interference. It was a real tight game. It was 0-0 at the time. And it was like the third quarter. And I went in there and got pass interference. And so that was kind of, we lost that game to Rick Casada, and then they had a really good football team. And then the same thing with NT. We had our struggles with them. But we had a classic game in 1969.
You did. Back then, 1961 and 1963, was Coach Yakopovich tinkering with the radar defense, or did it even exist back then?
No, when I played, we didn't do anything like that. He was a little ahead of his time, though, offensively. We didn't do it when I was there, but when I left, they sort of went to a double split, double wing offense. And really, Coach Yakopovich sort of took that from Tiger Ellis's run and shoot offense. But and NT, I think back when I was playing, still ran the single wing with John Chisera.
Yeah, they did a little bit of, not too much passing at that point. I mean,
correct. It was all running.
Greg Zayats, was the quarterback, I believe, in the 63 season, and he's still grumbling about it, that he couldn't pass, and George Vedder wouldn't let him pass it back then. So, it was just one of those things. Well, let me ask you this about Coach Yakopovich. What was his relationship with the other coaches in the Niagara Frontier League? You would see them, I'm sure he would see them at different coaching clinics in the summertime or whatnot. But what did he think, or what was his relationship with, say, maybe a George Vedder or a Clint Small or a Bob Adams?
I think from my recollections back then that he certainly respected those coaches, especially Clint Small and Vedder. I'm not sure there's any love lost between them, but he knew, based on the program that they ran, that, they had outstanding teams, very well coached, very well disciplined. And so it was interesting, being involved with Coach Yakopovich at that time. And he was sort of, here we are, stop us. If you can't stop us, we're just going to keep scoring on you. And I never agreed with that. Neither did Coach Fleischman at the time. But when you're trying to get a job or you're on a program, the head coach is the head coach. That's who you respect. And so we never, ever said anything negative about Coach Yakopovich about running up scores until after he had left in 75 and Dave Fleischman got the job. I'll never forget interviewing. We interviewed at McGamwell, the principal's house, and he did that individually. And he told us up front, this is a great story. He told us, he goes, you're at the bottom of the list. And of course, when I got interviewed, I said, why is that? And he goes, because you guys never spoke out about the fact that Coach Yakopovich was running up some scores, because his thing was, we're the offense, you're the defense. If you can't stop us, well, that's just the way it is. And so we paid a price for that. But through the process, Dave got the head job. I was teaching elementary school at the time. And in 75, he asked me to come up and to be his assistant coach and come to the high school to teach. So that's sort of what happened, back then.
You graduated in 1963 and moved on to the University of Alabama, where you played a couple of years. You played under Coach Bear Bryant. Talk about that experience, and better yet, talk about how you were recruited or how you got hooked up with Alabama.
All right. Well, like I said, I was supposed to go to BU. I sort of put all my eggs in one basket. I went to prep school in Worcester, Massachusetts, Worcester Academy. I took 20 postgraduates a year, and it was a great prep school. We played Phillips Andover, Phillips Exeter, some of the top prep schools in New England. And they sent me there to get a little bigger, a little stronger. And I took that route. And like I said, I went up for the visit, and Warren Schmackel was the head coach there. And I just didn't like it being in the city, because I was used to visiting Alabama because my dad was from there. I still have relatives there. I still go to Alabama games. So I went there not sure whether I could compete or be on a program like that. They were national champs in 1964. And I don't know if you know this about Alabama, but Bear Bryant recruited out of every high school in Alabama. And he used to take all the running backs, and he would make running backs offensive linemen. So at Alabama, believe it or not, in 1965, 66, until about 68, our offensive line at Alabama on the varsity only averaged about 210 pounds. And he made some of those backs offensive linemen. You know, we did tackle eligibles and stuff back then. And so his claim to fame was guys being agile, hostile, and mobile. And he took the best athletes. Well, in 1969, they decided they were going to play some better competition. Even in the bowl game, I never forget. I was a sophomore. Or junior, maybe I was a freshman. They played Nebraska in the Orange Bowl, I believe, and we were outweighed 45 pounds a player, and Alabama won that game. And on a game-to-game basis, you couldn't play that kind of schedule against those schools because they were really large stature-wise. That they started in 68 recruiting out of junior college, and the whole program at Alabama changed. We didn't even have a weight program at Alabama when I was there. So it was a totally different thing, but I learned so much about what I wanted to do being a coach from that program. I'd go down in the springtime and coach. My freshman coach was still alive at the time, and his name was Clem Griska. And I was able to sit on meetings, take films back. Like I said, we were turning to be an option football team under Dave Fleischman and myself. And so it was just an unbelievable experience. Bryant and Alabama was riding high. And I just learned so much about practice organization. And back then, I don't know if you know this or if you remember, but in 69, when I came back and volunteered at Alabama, we didn't do a regular stretching program. We did what they called quickness drills. And they were a short version of doing jumping jacks or toe touches. And we did it all as a team, and it was to get quicker. And that's what I brought to Kenmore West. And the guys and Jules Yakopovich called it the Tut drills. After my first three letters of my name, he called them the Tut drills. And we did those before each football game, warming up, and other teams looked at us like we were crazy. But that's what we did.
You had a North Tonawanda connection while you were at Alabama as well, too. Talk about who that person was.
Well, when I went to Alabama, I was dorming with another person, and I happened to run into Bob Stoltman, and we became roommates. And he played at NT, and I know he did track at NT, shot and disc, and his brother also, Billy, did. And we became excellent friends all the way through college. Now, he left Alabama after his freshman year because of the fact that we didn't have a weight program, and he was really into that. And he was I believe he was on a track scholarship at Alabama. And I think he wound up at either Eastern or Western Kentucky. But we stayed friends all the way through college, and we'd see each other in the summer times and stuff. So it was a great relationship that we had. He was a great guy.
You used Bill Stoltman as well, too. You were telling me a story when Coach Yakopovich told you to go visit an NT practice, unwelcome, uninvited, and you showed up there and you were spotted. So please tell that story.
Yeah, I was a volunteer coach, wanted to get into the program. Of course, back then, guys didn't leave coaching. You had to wait your turn to become a coach. Nowadays, it's hard to find coaches, but I'd do anything he asked me to do. So he said to me, hey, we have a bye week. I think we played NT in the middle of the season or it might have been the fourth game. I'm not sure, but we had a bye before we played them. And they had a really good team, and so did we. And he said, would you mind getting in your car and running over to the NT practice, hide as best you can, and see what you can find out the week before we play them? So I said, yeah, I'll do that. So I don't know if you know, but down on Meadow Drive there, before Meadow Drive, there's a church on the corner. I pulled in there and parked, and I had a Mach 1 Mustang out of college. And it was loud and everything. I pull in, I get out of the car. I'm standing next to the car. They're practicing. All of a sudden, George Vetter spots me. And he starts yelling, what are you doing? What are you doing? Are you over here watching our practice? What's going on? And I didn't want to run. I didn't want to get in the car and go. So I started walking out towards him. And the only thing that came in my head at the time to save myself was my relationship with Bob Stoltman. And I said, hey, Bob Stoltman and me went to school together. You know, we're at Alabama. I knew his brother, Billy. He took me, put his arm around me, walked me out to the middle of the practice field. I stood there and watched the remaining part of practice. Now, I think I told you the other day, they were only doing special teamwork, so I really didn't see anything. But I got back in my car when it was over and I left. I went back to West, and Jules said, well, when we play them this week, you got to make sure you hide in the stands or something. Make sure nobody sees you. So I went out. I did. I went up and sat in the top row of the bleachers at Kenmore West to watch the game. But I did go into the locker room at halftime. And I don't know if you remember that game or what happened, but we were losing at halftime. And I went in the locker room, and Jules usually would go out right away and start talking to the players. And we had an office that had windows in it that you could see the locker room. And what the coaches, we were sitting in there, he never went out to speak to the guys. The guys were sitting there with their heads hung low. Here we are losing the game. And it might have been 15-0. I'm not sure what the score was at that point, but we were losing. I don't think we had scored. And Jules was a great speaker. And he walks out in the locker room just before it's time for us to go on the field. And everybody's got their heads down. And he said, I want everybody to pick your heads up. And everybody sort of reluctantly did that. And then he said, I want you to smile. Of course, nobody was in the mood to smile, but he got a couple smiles out of a few guys. He goes, I want you to start laughing. I want you to start belly laughing out loud. And these guys started doing that. He stops, and then he says to everyone, if you want to be champions, go out and play like champions. And we left the locker room, and we won the game 50-15. I think we scored 50 points in the second half.
That was the 1969 game, correct? With the national championship, mythological national championship team from Kenmore West that year, correct?
That's correct. And now we have a monument that's been put up in the corner of the field by one of the players that I played with in 1961. He was a senior, John Washington, who owns Ivy League Construction. And he put up a monument in the corner by the scoreboard of the 69 team, the whole roster, all us coaches are on it, and a tribute to Jules Yakopovich. Now, I don't know if you remember, Ed, but back then, Kenmore West in 69, we played nobody both ways. Not one person on defense ever played offense, and not one person on offense ever played defense. And so we were playing teams that were, fielding a team of 11 that were mostly seniors, some of them going both ways. And we were able to go in there and play two platoon football, which was unheard of at that time in 69. And he did that. I believe we did that up until like 71. And then we had a change because, I'll tell you that story if you want to hear it later. But we two platoons, so we wore teams out as the games went on.
When did the radar defense come into play?
Well, he wrote that book When I was coming out of college, he might have wrote the book in 68. I'm not sure, because when I was down in Alabama, one of the high school coaches actually had that book, Radar for Winning Defense, or I can't remember exactly what the title was. But he wrote that book. And, if you want a quick lesson, what we did is we stood up, we played a 4-man front, we played in the gaps. So the 2 down tackles played on inside shoulder of the guards, and the defensive ends played slightly inside shoulder of the defensive ends. And we faced outward at a 45-degree angle. And Jules, again, was ahead of his time. Offensive linemen only can do so many things. They can block down, they can reach block, they can pull, they can pass block. So we read what the offensive linemen were doing and tried to avoid contact. And he sold that program to smaller. Mark Leas played defensive tackle for us, went on to coach at Tonawanda for years. He weighed like 145 pounds, defensive tackle. And we played that look, but you have to remember that on that team, which didn't happen after that, all the years I coached, we had 3 Division I players on that team that played. Robbie Sutton didn't play defense, but Beekler did. There were a couple of really good football players on that team. So that radar defense came in to vogue. Now, as good as that was, Ed, I thought Jules was way ahead of the game offensively, because we ran a true triple option attack. We didn't block 2 people on the defensive line. Robbie Sutton was excellent at reading those players. And we ran a run and shoot offense. Like I said, double split, double wing, single back. And we ran a true triple option attack. And it was a run and shoot style offense. And we also threw out of it. And nobody was doing that back then.
Coach Yakopovich, he got into the 70s, and towards the end of his football coaching career, things didn't go as well as he anticipated.
No.
And didn't have some winning seasons. And it kind of reminds me of parallels like a George Vetter, where
Right.
perhaps maybe the game had passed him by. Was that the case with Yakopovich, or was it a lack of talent that caused that program to take a nosedive?
Well, I think the biggest thing was that we oversold the program. Now we carry 50 plus players. Back then, I don't know if you remember this, but back then he actually cut kids. We never cut anybody when I coached. We kept everyone unless they were a problem. But we had so many guys coming out that he actually had to cut players from the varsity. But he oversold it to smaller stature players because we were reading and doing a lot of movement on defense. And what had happened was, and it happened in 72, Ed, when we went Federation and we started playing schools of comparative size, he had to get away from 2-platoon football. We just didn't have some of the talent either in those years. And we were getting crushed when we started playing, like I said, West Seneca East, West Seneca West, Frontier, those teams. And he was sick about it. I would go to his house every day in the summer and during the football season. And he was so distraught about the fact that we were losing. And he would say things like, I don't know why they don't get rid of me. We're just having trouble winning, and, this and that and the other. And it was a mixture of selling to small kids and also the fact that we just didn't seem to have the talent or the size to go up against some of those teams. And that carried over when Dave Fleischman took over the program in 75. We lost for the first couple of years and started winning. And when I took over the program, the same thing happened. We had a couple bad seasons and started, getting back on track and wound up having some pretty good teams.
When you took over, did you ever feel the pressure that you were following in succession to Dave Fleischman and Jules Yakopovich, and there was a high standard that you needed to maintain?
I did that because I volunteered the first year. I said, when I came out of college. The second year, I was a phys ed teacher in the Kenmore, but I got a JV job. So I coached JV football for 7 years with a couple different guys. Jeff Conklin was one of the guys that I wound up coach with. Jay Bowling was another. And I felt the pressure then because I was doing the offense that, he scored so many points. I better keep that going, And so I felt pressure at that point. When I'd taken over from Dave, I'd been with the program enough and I thought I learned enough. Dave was a great mentor for me. Knew a lot about football, but no one ever really knew that, even the players, because, back then, veteran, those guys, it was kind of autocratic rule. I'm the head coach, you're the assistants, the players are down here, and there was a pecking order. So it was a little difficult, but I didn't feel the pressure, other than the pressure I put on myself, that we wanted to have a successful program. And I told kids all through the years I coached, a successful program isn't necessarily what's on the scoreboard. I mean, we're out there to win. This is interscholastic football. But if you walk off the field after a game and you can look in the mirror and say you did everything you could possibly do to be successful, nobody can doubt you, not your coach, not people around you, not your parents, if you've given everything you can. So I didn't feel that kind of pressure. I love football and I love what I was doing.
You coached for from 1980 to 2000, either 20 or 21 seasons.
Right.
You don't see a lot of head coaches staying that long.
No, well, it's changed. It's changed because you have to remember the times that we were in. For whatever reason, a lot of guys that were married, their wives weren't working. They were home with their children. And there wasn't the pressure in the family that you had to do all these things. My wife was very understanding that she wouldn't see me until 8 or 9 at night. I coached 3 sports at West, and it was just a different era. And like I said, back then, guys didn't give up coaching. That's why people volunteered, hoping that you were going to get a position at some point. And then, like I said, all the guys I've coached with, and I think in my years of head coach, I probably had 25, 26 different guys come through that coached for a while. And then, either pressure from home, their wives started to work, they had kids. It just became untenable to spend the amount of time that you needed. So a lot of guys didn't stay in it after, I left for any length of time.
How was it, the rivalry during your time as a head coach, Ken West and North Tonawanda? You coached against Dave Anastasi, George Dermosich for a little bit, and Eric Jancy a little bit as well, too.
Well, Chuck Ramsey, too.
Oh, Chuck was still in the mix. And so you dealt with 4 NT coaches in 4 different eras.
Yes, and I really enjoyed most of my time was against Anastasi. I liked Dave. We used to talk a lot. He was a great guy. I thought Ramsey was a great guy. Eric, I didn't know very well because it was towards the tail end of when I was coaching. But the rivalry was huge. I mean, NT, Kenmore West, Tonawanda, Kenmore West were just huge rivalries back then. And always felt the pressure that those are the teams that you wanted to, to win and to beat. And like I said, when they talked about the Lumberjacks, North Tonawanda, we didn't want to cross that canal. I mean, it was tough. You had a lot of those big Polish kids playing football. It was a different era. And, I just have some great memories of playing, especially that last game I played as a senior. We had a player named Denny Bell that had a brain tumor, and he was brought up as a sophomore with me, but never got to play his junior and senior years because of a brain tumor. He was on the sidelines for that last NT Kenmore West game, and it was a moving tribute to him. And that was in like September, October. I don't remember what date it was, but he died before graduation our senior year. And so that we played that game in '69 for him.
What do you recall about playing North Tonawanda at the old George Vedder Stadium behind the junior high school on a Friday night?
Yeah, that's where I played my last game. You know, we didn't like going over there. I didn't like that scoreboard clock with that big hand going around. There were just some things about the field. You know, had a big crown on that field, huge crown. You could stand on one sideline. If guys were sitting on the bench on the other sideline, you could hardly see them. It was always, like I said, we're going to go in and play the Lumberjacks, you know, the big guys from North Tonawanda. And I remember they had a guy, Ed Steingasser. He must have weighed close to 280 pounds, you know, and they were playing single wing football and they were running the heck out of the ball. And what I hated the most, and yet it became kind of a theme. When John Chisera played, the band played that Mr. Touchdown song. I hated that. So it was a big rivalry, and you always knew you were going to be in for especially with George Vedder, a very physical game. Now, the other thing, and, you know, I don't mean it as a negative, but they were extremely aggressive all the time, and they would get a lot of, you know, personal foul injuries, but it didn't seem to slow them down. I mean, they were a very physical, in-your-face football team, and much more so, I felt, than Tonawanda, even though Tonawanda had some great players on it and great rivalry. But the NT guys, it was a tough go over there.
Yeah, you guys also drew a big crowd as well too, whether it be on the NT side or you had a good following from Kenmore West as well too for those games, correct?
Right. You're right. Always back then, usually at a high school game, all the stands were full, and over the years, that has dwindled. Part of it is because there are so many high school sports that weren't around back then. You played football, basketball, baseball. You know, soccer became big, volleyball became big, swimming became big. And then what happened while I was still coaching is all these sports, because teams and coaches wanted to be the best they could, they started, you know, working out and all year round. So if you were a swimmer, that's all you did. If you were a basketball player, that's all you did. I've had so many players that come back to me over the years that didn't play football, that were, for instance, in hockey, because it overlapped with football, that came back and said, geez, I wished I would have come out for football, but they never did because of, you know, either it interfered with the season or you couldn't miss practice. Now, today, coaches are a lot more flexible. Some of these guys, they miss a practice here or there. Coaches still let them compete. And we were brought up that wasn't the mentality. You had to be at practice. You know, I don't know if you remember this either. Kids look at me and they think I'm crazy. I go, do you realize that back when I played in the 60s, you had to earn a letter. You had to play in 16 quarters of football at Kenmore West. You only had to be in for one play, but they would go back and look at the tapes. You had to be in 16 quarters of football in order to earn a varsity letter at Kenmore West. And if you didn't, you just got a certificate at the banquet. You didn't earn a letter. And now I call it Little League syndrome. When I started, my dad was a Little League coach in the town of Tonawanda. He had great teams, the Harper All-Stars. One year he had a team that was undefeated, unscored on. But he'd go to a banquet, Ed, and they'd be giving out jackets and trophies. And first the trophies were 1 foot tall, then they were 3 foot tall. Everybody got a trophy just for participation. So when these kids came to Kenmore West, I would look at the team, and when I talked to them in the beginning of the season, I go, guys, you're playing for a letter, a Kenmore West letter. Back then, we did give out helmet decals. People started doing that for good plays and stuff. But I had very few, and so did Yakopovich. In fact, I don't know if we had any trophies that we gave out to kids when we did have banquets, until I started doing it for an offense and defensive player, special teams player, but very few and far between, because you had to earn it. You know, it wasn't just given to you.
How difficult, 2000, when you quit coaching, how difficult was it to take off the football coach's spikes and take the whistle off around your neck?
I'll never forget, I got interviewed our last game. We were in the playoffs. We lost to Lancaster, and I was interviewed in the locker room. And I said, you know, it was bittersweet in one way, in that my son was playing football. And I know so many coaches like Dick Adams at East, and there's others, that their kids went on to play college football, or even in high school, if they didn't play at the school their dad coached at, who never got to see their sons play the game. And my father and mother, even when I was in prep school and when I was in college, they came to every game I ever played in. And I made it a point that I told my son when he played at Grand Island, I said, I am not going to miss any of your football games. So I don't know if you know this, Ed, but a couple of years before I retired, I had made that commitment to my son that I was not going to miss any of his games. So I went to our administration and I said, look, I'm either going to retire from football. And this was like in, I think 99, 98, when my son started playing. I said, I got a choice here. I can either watch my son or I can coach and not watch my son. I said, is there anything that we can do to work this out? I wanted to take a leave of absence just for 2 years while he was a junior and senior, because I coached when he was a sophomore. And they said, no, we don't want to set precedent. Now they do things like that. But they said they didn't want to set precedent. I said, well, what else can I do? Either that or walk away from this. And I really didn't want to do that. And they said, look, I had fought at West for a number of years that I wanted to have the coaches. We had a junior high program with 2 coaches. We had a JV program with 2 coaches, and the varsity had 2 coaches. And they were all paid differently. For instance, the head junior high coach made more than the assistant varsity coach. And I thought that was crazy because we spent a lot more time and started early and all these things. So I got the school board to initiate a program where the head coach made X number of dollars and all the assistants in the football program made the same amount of money. We had 3 steps. So, you know, it went up gradually. But so by doing that, what they said to me is, look, because they're all getting paid equal, we will allow you to appoint somebody to be the interim head coach. You still come to practice. You show up to the games that you can show up at. And I did that. And I turned everything over to Rich Harris for those 2 seasons. He did the recruiting. He did the banquet. He called the plays. I just coached the position. I still had, quite a bit of input into the program, but we did that. And I believe, and then what I made them a promise. I said, if you'll do that for me for 2 years, I will come back and I will coach again if that's what you want me to do. And that's what I did. I came back in 2000 and took over the program again. And we had some issues those couple of years with, talent stuff. But in 2000, I had a really good team. We wound up 6-2, went to the playoffs. And that was my last year coaching. And one of the things is, they offered us guys tier 1, a great retirement. It was something that I didn't feel that I could pass up at 55, even though I still wanted to coach. Well, I don't know if you know this, but my nephew's the head coach of Grand Island, Dean Santorio.
Right.
And Dean coached with us for a year or 2 when he got out of college at West. He volunteered, fell into it over Grand Island. He wanted me to come out, and he asked me if I wanted to coach with him, but I had started driving a school bus, and I didn't get off the bus till after 4:00 in the afternoon, and they started practice early because school was out at Grand Island at 2:30. So I never got to do that. But what was neat is my nephew, Dean, coached my son, JJ. And the only thing, and Dean has coached with me, The only thing I haven't done in my lifetime is coach with Dean. So he even asked me now that I'm off the bus about doing it. But I'm to the point now that I'd just rather go watch the games, not have to worry about getting first downs and all those kinds of things. But yeah, so, that's sort of how that wound up. And I love coaching. Here's what happened. 6 years ago now, some of the guys got a hold of me, some of my former players on Facebook, and said, hey, we're going to do this alumni, Kenmore West, Kenmore East tackle football game. Well, I didn't realize it was tackle. They just said, would you coach us one more time? And I said, of course, I'd love to do that. I'll volunteer. So my son, myself, and Jerry Falgiano, who coached at Hutch Tech for years, lived over near Crosby. And I went out on a Sunday. They said, we're going to have a practice. I went out on a Sunday. There were 8 guys there. I go, what are we going to do here? I go, where are the belts for the flag football? They go, no, coach, this is tackle football. I said, tackle football? What are you guys, nuts? You guys are older. You're married. You got kids. How are we going to do this? Well, I didn't realize the company went around the country, and NT and Tonawanda have done this with alumni football. This guy comes around, provides all the equipment, the jerseys, procures the field, opens the concession stand, films the games. You have to sign a waiver, and we're going to play this contact football. So I thought, well, you know what? I think they're nuts, but I think that'd be kind of cool. I'd like to coach again, and especially with my son being there. So I thought it was going to be a 1-year deal. Well, we played our first game, and the field we played on was at Tonawanda. Because Joe Kelly, who's the coach there, played for me at West, and he didn't play the first year on the alumni team, but he did the last year. But we wound up doing it for 5 years, Ed, and it was so much fun. It's probably the most fun that I ever had coaching, because these parents, guys who are parents now, would have a team dinner, would have a team breakfast. They'd bring their families, they'd bring their children. And it was probably the coolest thing that I've ever done in my life. And we did it for 5 years. And the last year, we won 4 out of 5 years. We lost the last year to East 2 years ago. But then we didn't play it last year because of COVID. And we didn't play it this year. And most of the guys are in their 40s now, because most of the guys were had graduated from West between 1999 and 2005. And I had some great guys out there. We had 36 guys show up just about every year, fly in from all over the country to play this contact football game. And knock on wood, we only had one guy that ever really got hurt because they had to sign a waiver, and we played at Tonawanda, and then we flip-flopped between East and West. And we have an alumni football website, probably got almost 200 members. And what's cool about coaching, Ed, that overshadows everything for me. And like I said, winning's important, but that's not what's most important. Most important is the relationships that you make with those players over the years. And I have guys that played for me. We're lifelong friends. And some of them are coaching still, but a lot of them played in this alumni game, and we stay in contact all the time. And what's most important are the relationships that you make, not necessarily the X's and O's, and not necessarily, the winning.
You also have a connection to North Tonawanda too, as well, with family members that were part of the program at one time. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah. My brother-in-law, Tom Howe, was one of the tri-captains of the 1969 football team. So I actually he got hurt that year, but I got to coach him a little bit when I was volunteering in 69. And he lives in North Tonawanda, and he has 4 boys, 3 of them which played football at NT. The Haug boys, Haug. Jason Haug played. David Haug played. They're both police officers, by the way. One's in Niagara Falls. David's a state trooper. And TJ, the youngest of the boys, he got a championship ring when Eric Jancy and that team, I believe he told me 2009, they won the state football championship. Well, Tom Howe, my brother-in-law, became our filmer at Kenmore West. He did all our video. And when his kids played at NT, especially TJ, the last one that went through, he started filming for Eric, and he would do, back and forth our games. And he made a hat up, a baseball hat, and half the hat said NT on it, and half the hat said Kenmore West on it. And it was really kind of neat. So I have a real connection with those guys in the NT football program.
I know you had a devastating fire that burned your house down a few years ago. And I'm glad to see that you still were able to find or salvage a couple of Kenmore West NT films. You said one from 1979 and I don't recall the other year.
1980.
1980.
Yeah, I found a couple films. We had a whole trove of films at Kenmore West that they kept up in a room, a secure room. And before I left West, by mistake, custodian was cleaning out stuff, and Jules had put those tapes up there. And some of them he might have kept, but I don't know where they would be. Dave Fleischman, to my knowledge, doesn't have any. He's passed away, but I don't believe he had any. And they all got tossed out. So there might be some in the locker room at West. I've talked to Coach Haynes, and we're going to see. He's busy right now, see whether he can find any. But I did find in my basement, I lost some to the fire, some to a flood a couple of years before that. And I did find 2 tapes here from 79 and 80. So hopefully contribute a little bit to what you're doing.
I want to ask one final question of you, and I want to thank you for this time. It's been fascinating. We've been going close to 50 minutes right now.
Oh, wow.
Do you have any what regrets, if any, do you have regarding your playing and coaching career?
Well, it's a double-edged sword. I never really got hurt seriously, so that was a blessing from playing all 3 years of high school, prep school, and a couple of years at college, and running track, because I did a lot more track later on than I did, football. But I never got hurt seriously, but the wear and tear on my body has taken its toll. But as most players will tell you, I would never do anything differently. I enjoyed it. What I have advice, and I gave it to my son. My son was a really good football player at Grand Island, quarterback. Got recruited at a number of schools. D1 was the only one was Buff State. Not Buff State, at UB, excuse me, because he not only was a quarterback, but he was a punter, and he made all New Jersey as a kicker, and he had a great quarterback career there at Portland where he played. But he could have gone to UB on a scholarship and punted. But I said to him, Jay, we call him JJ, Jerry Jr. I said, I would recommend anybody going somewhere where they know they're going to get on the field and participate much more than going to a school because of the name. Now, I say that, yet I went to Alabama as a walk-on with a scholarship program, but I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world, because I learned so much about the game and what I wanted to do, coaching wise, and some of the relationships that I had. Like I said, I was able to go to Alabama games because my freshman coach just passed away about 6 years ago. He was 98 years old, and he ran Bear Bryant Museum. And I'd take Dean and all my son-in-laws and my son. We'd go down to Alabama. He'd get us tickets to the game. We'd go through the museum. The last game I went to, this is a great story. I'll make it quick. I was very good friends with Kenny Stabler. I lived next door to him for 2 years in an apartment complex at Alabama. And he did the color commentary on radio for Alabama. And so we had press box tickets to one of the games I took most of the family to, the guys. And we got up in the press box, got to meet all the coaches. I got to have my son and my nephew, Dean, who's coach, Johnny Robinson from he was his idol, Dean. Santorio. He got to meet him. He was up in the press box doing something for one of the broadcast outfits, and they got to meet Kenny Stabler, and they thought that was just the coolest thing going. And then I would go down and visit Alabama, and Glenn Briscoe still was there running the museum. And whenever I went, he'd take us to lunch, take us into the room, talk about the old times, because most of the coaches in those programs stay on as the ticket manager or doing one thing or another. So that would be my thing is, go somewhere where you can play, get on the field. And I've told that to a lot of my athletes that have come through, be the big fish in a small pond versus the other way around.
Jerry Tutwiler, this was a great conversation today. I want to thank you so much. It was very nice to meet you. Very nice to hear your stories.
Well, I want to thank you.
I wish you well. I wish you good health. And thank you so much for joining me today on the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel.
I want to thank you very much. I want to thank John Caruso, who's having some medical issues, getting a hold of me. I recruited him, Ed, off the playing field out at Crosby when I was coaching JV. He was out throwing a football around. I stopped him. I said, "Come in here, kid." I go, "What's your name?" He goes, "John Caruso." I go, "Why aren't you playing football?" And that's how he started playing at West. He's a great guy. So I appreciate him. I appreciate all you're doing for high school football in Western New York.
Thank you so much.
Very much.
Be well.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.